Good evening, ladies and gentlemen, and welcome to Cocktails and Curiosities, the podcast we do every Sunday at 8 p.m. Central Standard Time, where we basically kind of get drunk and, well, talk about stuff that we find interesting. Today's episode will be basically run by Knox for the time being, who is my co-host, and we'll be talking about hyperobjects. If you don't know really what we're about to talk about, I would highly recommend you go either listen to our last episode of the podcast or try to pull up some information on it in the meantime. I actually forgot I need to go make the drinks, which I don't even know what I'm gonna mix them with. I think I'm just gonna drink mine straight. But that's pretty much it. I'm gonna pull Knox into the call, and I will let him kind of direct what's going on.
Hello.
Hello.
Changed in audio quality because my DAC is messed up for whatever reason.
Yeah, I'll probably have to get in there at some point and figure out what the hell's wrong with that.
I'll mess with it later. I feel like doing it right now, so yeah, late episode.
Yes. I was actually about to talk about that before I had to go get what we're gonna drink and kind of let you kind of start us off.
Okay.
But the reason we didn't do last week's podcast, is because me and Knox both had engagements to attend to Saturday or Sunday, so we were gonna do it, but we just weren't available to do it. So this is your kind of, hey, here's your episode for the week. Sorry about it.
Makeup episode.
Yeah, makeup episode.
And I will also apologize. I still have yet to set up the Nobis channel. Probably next week, actually. So I might have 2 more episodes without the Nobis channel. This one and the next one, and then I'll set it up next week. Because I've got other things that I'm more focused on this week.
Yep. But for now, I'm gonna let you kind of either get him caught up to speed or get us started. I'm gonna go ahead and get our drinks. We're probably gonna be drinking it straight because we don't have any mixers.
Yeah, I'm not surprised.
So I'll go grab that.
Yes. All right. Let's see. So today we're gonna talk about 2 things. I have 2 topics today. One of them is a continuation. They're both technically continuations of last episode's topic of hyperobjects, which I'll explain in a second. But one of them is the first topic we'll get into is my theory on soul and how that relates to hyperobjects and then how that relates to a wider topic, which is a theory I've been working on. Working title name, but it's I've been mulling around with something along the lines of um oh god, reflective fractal theory or something along that lines. I haven't exactly gotten a full title or a full like concept working. It's just been up in my head. Um, However, if it's true, it won't matter that I can't get it. I can't explain it properly, but that's besides the point. Um, I will give a refresher course on hyperobjects real quick. Thank you, thank you, thank you, thank you, thank you. So essentially, let me pull up the article real quick while I'm talking about this. Essentially, a hyperobject is a type of concept that, ooh, excuse me. One of the uh examples of it is race or class or climate change, and it has 5 defining properties, which is it's viscous, so that it adheres to any other object. And for clarification, an object in this philosophy, it's a type of thought, is something like any kind of conceivable identity or describable thing can be classified as an object. So a person can technically be classified as an object in this case. However, upsetting that may sound. But other things such as like concepts or ideas can also be objects. So human resources can be an object. Um, what's another good one? Ethics, emissions. Those are more in the hyperobject realm, but they can also be objects. So thoughts can be objects. Certain kinds of like thoughts, like nature is an object. However, nature would probably classify as a hyperobject. So to continue this refresher, hyperobjects have five distinct traits. One is it's viscous. In other words, it adheres to any object that it touches. In that case, like if your HR department or your like workplace, okay, a company is a good example. A company is an object, but it's not a hyperobject. It is a concept or identity. However, it doesn't have the traits that define it as a hyperobject. However, in a company, there is probably some kind of ethics committee or a board of ethics, and that is an ethics is a hyperobject. Ethics adheres to any company, and they can't get away from it once it's stuck to them. Once they start working towards ethics, they can't get away from ethics. Ethics are now an ingrained part of that company. It is molten. In other words, the hyperobject is so massive that they refute the idea that space-time is fixed, concrete, and consistent. In other words, it is an object that is, which is part of the second one, which is non-local, and that is they're massively distributed over time and space. Um, in other words, the concept, the hyperobject, is something that ethics, like ethics is the example I'm going with right now. Ethics is a massive idea that spans a wide area, a wide space. Every different place, every different geopolitical area has different types of ethics, and those ethics change over time. But that's all part of the one hyperobject of ethics. They're phased, so they occupy a higher dimension than other entities can normally perceive. They appear to come and go, and would appear differently to an observer with a higher dimensional view. Essentially, this just means that yawn, excuse me, that the hyperobject is because it can basically, like, ethics can come up randomly and appear to just disappear in a conversation. It can be something that comes in and disappears. Think of it more like a physical object that's higher dimensional. And then it's interobjective. So it are formed by relations between hyperobjects are formed by relations between more than one object. Objects are only able to perceive to the imprint or footprint of a hyperobject upon other objects revealed as information. So the hyperobject of in this example they have global warming, which is a bit of a better one, is formed from the interaction between the sun, fossil fuels, carbon dioxide, and other objects. Yet, global warming is made apparent through emission levels, temperature changes, and ocean levels, making it seem as if global warming is a product of scientific models rather than an object that predated its own measurement. Essentially, global warming seems to appear out of the data instead of actually being there before the data was recorded, before we made that data. So those are hyperobjects. Essentially, think of them as large concepts that can't be touched. Their effects are experienced widely through space and time. Um, and this brings me to my first topic. Axel, how are you?
I am all right. You said a lot of fancy things, and I know we went over this last week, and even now, it's still difficult for me to wrap my head around it.
Yeah.
But
I'll try and give a bit of like a TLDR, like a poor man's thought.
like
Imagine a hyperobject as being a a you know the concept of memes, not in the sense of like the internet culture of memes, but like pre-internet culture, the idea of a meme. It was coined by a man who believed that memes, which were essentially considered one unit of thought.
yeah,
So, like the idea of ethics or the idea of class is a large meme. However, the inner minute things like here's an example: um, the poor are oppressed by the rich. That is a meme. It is the smallest conceivable object of thought. It is a thought that is as small as possible. There's no extra fluff to it. That is a meme. And the concept is that it's passed on through generations like genes are. But instead of being passed and mutated via repetitive reproduction, in being able to hold on to it more, genes from creatures have higher stability, so they can be passed on repetitively and still seem quite similar. However, memes can be obfuscated and mutated almost just in any passing. The even just the concept of the rich oppress the poor, that meme, by me telling it to you, you have a completely different view of what that sentence means than anyone else does. And because of that, that concept or idea changes by you knowing it. However, that also spreads that meme, that idea, to other people. And a hyperobject is just a very, very large meme, or a bunch of memes that create one entity, and that entity, because it's known by so many people, is hyperdimensional. It has more. It moves through more dimensions than just like throwing a baseball moves through 3 dimensions. Well, technically moves through four if you count time. Um, and a hyperobject moves through multiple dimensions in the sense that it almost seems to appear and disappear throughout the world. And so that concept of, say, I don't know, the poor oppress the rich, that concept can be seen all throughout history as an idea. However, the idea of class warfare, the actual hyperobject that attaches itself to that meme and many other memes, seems to move in and out of society. So like there may be a decade where that's just not a conversation topic, and then the next decade it's suddenly something that everyone's concerned about, and then the next decade it's gone again. That's the movement of a hyperobject through space. Does that make a little bit more sense?
yeah. I mean, like to me, like besides like the very down like minuscule intricacies of a hyperobject, I get the general concept behind it.
That's the best like shotgun blast explanation I can give. I can go into very particular ones, which is what I'm about to do. The thing I'd like to talk about is the concept of soul. Now, everyone defines the human as having three parts, three elements in most alchemic formulas or in most archaic uh, thought philosophies, and that is the mind, the body, and the soul.
Mm-hmm.
Most people nowadays that are more inclined towards science or atheism or in that kind of realm don't like to consider the soul to be one of those objects. They consider it to just be the mind and the body. However, I am not religious in the sense of most people's definition. And I'm generally scientifically minded to some degree. However, I'm a gooey prickle instead of a prickly goo. I tend towards the goos more than the prickles. If you understand that, uh, marry me. Um,
Do it.
but
Do it now. If you understand, marry me
it's
right now.
I don't know. I float in between prickly goo and gooey prickle, like the very like edge of that. I used to be more of a prickly goo, but now I'm more of a gooey prickle. Um,
I'm sure that
but
means something.
yeah, that's like an inside joke, almost. Uh, Basically, prickles like things, like they like numbers, they like precise stuff, they like logical things. Gooey people, it's basically the difference between type A is prickles and type B is goo. Is the
Okay.
best way to describe it as close as I can get to it. But it's one of those things that you understand intuitively. Like, when you meet a prickly person and when you meet a gooey person. Like, that's like, you just know.
Yeah.
Um, so, yeah, I like to be somewhat scientifically minded, and I tend to doubt things highly. I like ideas, and I like talking about them. However, I never will stick to one idea or concept for very long. I normally switch it up a lot. However, there are a few concepts that stick with me. And one of the ones that has become a personal, I don't know if I say conviction, but a theory that I've quite enjoyed is the concept that soul is actually a thing. It's a hyperobject. However, it is a thing. And I think consciousness is a hyperobject too. However, that's a topic for another time. But the soul is more important to me because all the concepts relating around the soul are intuitive understandings of what the concept of soul should mean. However, none of them actually pin down what is soul. What does that mean from a scientific perspective, from a phenomenological perspective? What does soul do? What is soul? And I thought about this for a long time, and I realized, in my opinion, if I had to pin it down to something, soul is a consciousness's or the mind's relationship to everything else and or one's relationship in general. And it's a hyperobject. Now let me explain this a little bit more in depth. We'll start on the baseline fundamental of a person's body and mind and how that interacts. The body and mind's connection between the two, where the mind touches the body and the body touches the mind, and essentially what science has been trying to figure out in neuroscience forever, which is how does the mind correlate to neurons firing in the brain, and how does the mind correlate to the body? The thing that correlates the two, the thing that attaches the two, is soul. Soul attaches those two pieces. However, it's more of a simple like you can't say the mind controls the body or the body controls the mind. They're interrelated and interdependent. They arise of each other. The When one has a body, they have a mind. When they have a mind, they have a body. Normally, at least from our own perspective, because it's hard to rationalize a perspective of one without the other. It's possible, however, um, it's more like the connection between the two gets severed instead of there actually not being those two things. However, most people, when they are born, if they're born, you can't have a baby that's born that doesn't have a body. That just doesn't happen. And if a baby is born without a mind, normally it can have a body but no mind, then it's a stillborn and it's dead. And we consider that not as a person either. If it's born brain dead, that's a weird it's almost the same as being dead except the body's functioning. It means it means a body was created without a person being attached to it. And I think normally when someone's brain dead, you have to put them on life support. So really, they would die eventually either way because they can't eat, they can't drink, they can't do any of the things that is required for a person to continue to live. And I would consider that more along the lines of a homunculus, an artificial body or an artificial human. And, it's not the exact same thing, but it's in that area of being in the in between area of something, and not and kind of in the exceptions. However, that's just one aspect because it starts to move out into the world. You then have your mind's connection to everything else. First of all, you have your relationships with other people. You have your relationships with your environment, such as, I mean, simply drinking water would be a relationship with the environment. And things like, are you a clean freak or are you messy? Do you how do you view nature? Do you like natural things near you, or do you prefer a concrete jungle? Do you like living on a farm? That's relationships considered through the lens of your environment. There's also your mental relationships with things like tools. Uh, there was I remember this is all this thinking. These two theories I'm about to talk about were something that I thought about before I seen this video, but most of this conversation topic is based on was solidified from a video I saw from Vsauce, which was uh, the future of reasoning, which I will again give a shout out to. And he referred to as what is the mind, and he says that it can essentially be defined as a tool to help us do something. However, the tools in front of us are extensions of our minds. And a certain philosopher who went by the name of Alan Watts, I believe it was Alan Watts. It was either Alan Watts or Terence McKenna. I can't remember which. I actually think it was Terence McKenna. He theorized that the I know Terence McKenna talked about it. I think Alan Watts might have, but he might not have been old enough, or might not have been around recently enough to have ever seen the internet. But he said that the internet and our connection with it is an extension of our mind, because the way our mind forms is we have the brain stem, and that bit that's right on top of the brain stem is what most animals have. And then we develop that outer layer, which is what distinguishes us from, which is what's considered to house higher level consciousness, and it distinguishes us from animals to a certain degree. However, the I think it was Terence McKenna. Terence McKenna theorized that the internet is this layer on top of that layer, and it's part of the collective unconscious, and it is a massive brain that exists outside of us as a hyperobject essentially. And I truly believe that that connection and the connection that you feel towards the tools that you use, which falls into that as well. It's part of your mind. When you pick up a tool, it becomes a part of your body and your mind. It attaches itself to you to some degree. And some people may say, well, that doesn't make any sense. And what I tell you is you got to have a bit of more of an open mind, do your own research on this, because this is more of a light surface level analysis of this topic, because I want to move on to my second topic. But the idea is that all those interactions and those relationships with other things, those connections, uh, that is the soul. And um, even something as simple as the the point in between where you see things from your eye, where they become neurons, and the farthest distance that you can see at any given time, that area of sight could be considered a part of you. And if we take that as a whole and say that that's a soul, that your soul is every relationship you have with everything, which would make it a hyperobject because it'd just be massive. It'd be massive, which is part of being a hyperobject. It would be viscous because if you interact with something, it's part of your hyperobject now, your soul. It is massively distributed through time and space because, for example, I have friends that are on the other side of the planet. That's part of my soul, though. That's part of my hyperobject. And I exist over a large stretch of time, at least by human life standards. I'm probably going to exist over a large stretch of time. That's more of a theory than anything else. I haven't put that to the test yet. Jury's still out on that one. Um, I, by this definition, would have to occupy a higher dimensional space. The soul would. Although we may not be able to perceive the higher dimensional spaces, I'm almost certain that every person exists in higher dimensional spaces than the three that we can perceive through our normal visionary and basically our five senses. If you just talk about dimensions as an area in which change occurs, you can name off hundreds probably. I mean, you can just say time is one. Thought is an area that changes over time. Uh, if you even say the human body is separate from everything else, and that because that changed over time, but we'd say that's probably in the three dimensions. So we've already got five. We've got thought, the three dimensions of space and time. We can say that if there's multiple realities, that moving between those different realities would also be a dimension. We could, extrapolate multiple dimensions as we go up. It'd be harder and harder as we make more and more, but it's possible. And hyperobjects, by definition, are formed by relations between more than one object. And I believe the soul is a hyperobject that is part of each person. And the only way that you can tell that it exists is by, as it says, the impact on other objects. In other words, on my relation to global warming and the ecosystem, my relationship to Axel, my relationship to my rent and the complex I live at, my relationship to the people that also live here, my relationship to everything, all those things, because of the impact that my soul has on those people and on myself. That's how you can tell that its existence exists. However, I think the interobjective, which is that part, is the biggest thing that makes the soul a hyperobject, other than its non-locality and fucking massiveness. But mainly that bit where it's formed by relations between more than one object. So that is my theory on soul, which I will now allow Axel to chime in with any comments, concerns, questions, anything.
Besides you cooking my brain alive?
I apologize. Maybe?
So, like,
Let's talk about this for a bit.
if I could like put like a nail on it, and like from my understanding at least, I'm sure some people would get this much easier than I will,
Or I would have a much harder time. So
or much
please
harder
ask
time.
as many questions.
Like, so if I understand this correctly, the soul in like its essence isn't particularly. We both know it's not particularly material, but it's like the between of the material. Like, not like a great example would be like your interaction with objects for day-to-day use. The interaction between them and what connects them isn't the fact like you're hand grabbing something or you looking at something or taking a drink of water of something or whatever. It's the time between almost.
In a sense, it's the connection between your body and mind, and that connection between everything else. Every other connection you have. Any place where you can say these two things interact with each other, in between those two interactions, in that interaction is the soul. The soul exists there. It's your relationship to other things. So, like, even something as simple as another person being shorter than me or taller than me, that is the soul exists in that relationship. In the relationship between their height and my height exists the soul. And between every other interaction, like us being introduced to each other and us being like, say I become friends with this person now, our friendship is formed from soul. The soul forms that friendship because it's the relationship between us two. Friendship itself is the soul. Something like love. Love is the soul. It's made of soul. It's not made of mind or body. Because if you focus too much on the mind, you get, say, uh, this is my theory on aromantics and asexuals. Is it's a mismatch between the connection between body and soul. It may not be wrong. It's just another experience. I'm not saying that it's a problem. I'm just saying it's a mismatch between those two connections when it comes to love. And I'm sure there are other places where that mismatch manifests. However, if you are too focused on love in the mental space, you have an asexual who only cares about the concepts that float around love. So like romantic things and romantic feelings, like they would much rather receive they would much rather be a part of a concept of love. So like a romantic dinner than they would to physically interact with someone they love. They want the mental space of it. And someone who is aromantic is mismatched from their mental space and is more focused on the physical interactions of love. They're more focused on physical touch, physical affection, being physically close to someone. And that mismatch is what causes that manifestation in their personality. However, if those two are aligned, you get what one might call divine love love of the soul, because in my definition something being divine just means it is a proper adherence to the soul. You can divinely hammer a nail in because it just means that you in the hyperobject that is your soul has a proper connection from your mind to your body, from your body and mind to the hammer, and from the hammer to the nail, and from the nail to whatever you're nailing down or hammering the nail into. And that connection, that full connection, if that's properly maintained and done well, you have a divine hammering of a nail. And you can do that with any other interaction. Any other connection can be done divinely. It just means that you're properly, I wouldn't say conscious of the relationships, but the relationships have the an adequate and proper um amount, and or what I would more refer to as a proper manifestation and alignment of soul, or soul energy, if you want to put it that way. Because to me, energy is the best way to describe what soul is. Nothing can exist without energy behind and in front of it, and energy must move. And souls seems to be very closely related with energy. They seem to be kind of similar. Your mind runs on energy, and your body runs on energy, and that connection between them forms what would be the soul, and that extrapolates out to everything else.
Okay.
Does that make a little bit more sense?
Yeah, it does.
Any other questions? Because even if it's a dumb question or a very simple question, give me
So,
them, because there's no other people here to ask questions.
so if my brain wants to work, I think I understand, but I think for other people at home, it'd be a matter of like, hey, you know, the interaction between two people is the same thing as an interaction between our daily objects and lives and tools that we use. In the case
No.
of the soul.
Yes and no. So they both contain soul. However, they are different. So, like an interaction between your body and mind contains soul. However, it is a different kind of interaction than you would have with, say, a person. However, they can be similar, such as think about people that have known each other for a long time and they can like almost know what the other person's thinking without them having to say anything. That is a proper manifestation and alignment of soul because they basically become one person. And it's the
Gotcha.
thing that it's essentially what I would refer to it as is the thing that links or the thing that connects, the thing that makes two whole, two things one.
Hmm.
That's soul. And another way to explain it would be essentially by speaking around it, by essentially pointing out where this concept manifests itself even in our everyday speech. Let's talk about someone who has a good soul. So, a holy person would say you have a good soul.
Mm-hmm.
That would be someone who properly maintains the connections around them between themselves, the objects that they interact with in themselves and people. For example, if you perceive, doing hard drugs as harmful to yourself, depending on what drugs you do, but let's say you're a cocaine addict, that's an improper connection between your relation to that drug and yourself, and that connection is maintained by soul. And that improper manifestation, I would consider that more of an improper alignment, is bad soul. And if you have a good soul, you have a proper alignment between that, whether that be from your perspective, having no interaction with it, having avoiding it entirely, using it in moderation, or I don't know, drinking yourself to death. It can be any of those things. However, it has to be proper within your life. So think about one of our relations drinks, but they drink after 8:30 p.m. and that's very strict about them. So that they drink every day, but they drink at that time and they make sure they don't overindulge by doing that. They maintain moderation, which in a way is a proper alignment of soul. And you can say, for example, someone selling their soul. Really, what that means is they're selling out their relation to other things, whether that be to say the environment of a company or a CEO uh, uh, producing for profits with blatant disregard for their footprint on the environment. That's someone with a bad soul because they have a misalignment of their relation between themselves and nature and the environment. And you can say that a person who sold their soul could also be someone who sold themselves out or sold all their friends out, like a snitch or whatever it might be, for you know, pretend they don't know their friends once they get famous and basically forget all their connections. That can be a misalignment of soul as well, and we can say that's someone who sold their soul. Basically, they they for their own profit and gain in either the short term or the near short term, um, forego their connection with other things, whether that be with nature or people or even with themselves, by say doing things that they felt were immoral, but doing them anyways because it would acquire them profit in some way, shape, or form. And that would be a misalignment of soul, and you could say they sold their soul. Does that clarify things a little better?
Yeah. Again, for me, for the most part, I get it. Like I understand, but it's more of like extra clarification for people at home. Like I said,
Yeah.
there's nobody else for us to
Any
talk to but each other.
yeah. Any other questions you can think of?
Uh, what about like what would you consider somebody with an old soul? Because I've been called that a couple times before.
I Old soul is a the best way I can describe it is it to me the soul develops as someone grows. So you may start out with a bad relation to something and through effort and work form a better relationship. And to me the term of an old soul just means that your soul is very developed or very mature. Now, and more focusing on the word mature. That means you have a lot of really good connections, or you are more aligned with the general flow of the universe. Because I do believe that the proper alignment is formed. This will get in more into my future theory, the theory after this, but is formed more from a proper alignment of what I call the reflections, and that's something that I'll have to get into in a minute. Um, uh, but it essentially, if you, the best way to describe it in very very simple terms is you have a lot of connections that are properly maintained, or you have way more connections than most people have that are of generally standard, average, or above average quality.
Gotcha.
So there may be some people, like for example, think of the person um who goes to their 9 to 5 job, spends all their money on booze and watching television, and doesn't really have more than surface level friendships, doesn't really understand how the world works, is very immature. That kind of person, we wouldn't consider them an old soul, mainly because most of their connections with the other parts of reality aren't formed properly, aren't manifesting properly, or are misaligned. And that would be what we would refer to as someone who is a young soul, or someone who's just developing.
Gotcha.
Although there are more other connotations with old soul. However, my own definition of it is that someone who has either a large number of connections or soul connections, or at least has a lot of there that are at least average. They're at least proper in some degree. So, any other questions you can think of?
I think that's gonna be it for me at least. Mainly because we should probably move on, at least as far as time's
Yeah.
concerned.
Feel free to ask questions, and I will try and do a clarification next episode. That's what I'll do if there
Okay.
are any questions. And we can talk about this over the week, and if we have any like good like clarification ideas that we want to say, we can put those in there.
All right.
Um, because the next part gets trickier. It's a lot more complex. So this is a personal theory of mine. This is more of a metaphysical theory in a sense. It's a theory of the universe. And it's called the I think I went with reflective fractal, but I'll go with reflection theory. Fractal reflection theory. And it's a working title. I haven't but those are the two main parts. We'll start with the fractal part because that's the easier part to understand. It has been cataloged in science and in spiritual
Spiritual
endeavors,
endeavors
or
or
archaic, what I would refer
for
to as archaic endeavors. So things like witchcraft and paganism and things like that. That the world exists in a form of fractal existence. In that sense, uh, the Hermetic tradition, for example, referred to it as above, so below, and so below or as below, so above. In other words, the workings of something very small also work the same way in a very large sense. So think about the nucleus of an atom compared to the shape of a solar system, or how most things form in the golden ratio when they form in spirals, or the way that trees grow and the way that they branch out also branches out fractally. And most of the universe appears to be fractal in nature. Basically, it's a pattern. For those that don't know what fractal means, which actually it should probably define, I will pull up the actual definition real quick. The simple definition, which is an object whose parts at infinitely many levels of magnification appear geometrically similar to the whole. Um, and I think the better way to put it is a geometric figure that repeats itself under several levels of magnification and shows self similarity on all scales. That I think the second one's the better definition. Um, so something that like think of I would just look up a fractal images of fractal trees. I think the fractal tree is the one that like as a programmer was like the first thing I ever programmed. Uh, because a lot of things in well, not programming per se, but like in like data and computers work in like fractal forms like that. Um, but there's a lot of things in nature that all appear to be fractal. Like trees are the best example of fractals. I think ferns are a really good example of fractals. So the idea that, however, I'm going to push this concept a step further and say that the inner workings of the mind are the beginning stem of that fractal, and they fractal out into our understanding of the universe. So our own perception of reality is based on the fractal that is within us, and that fractal can shift and turn because a fractal can be manipulated to appear differently as you look at it. Basically, it's like turning a leaf in your fingers; it spins and changes. However, you're only viewing one perspective of it, one two-dimensional idea as you spin it, and it will change. It's changing three-dimensionally, but two-dimensionally, it appears to move in and out of itself. A bit hard of a concept to define. However, my theory is this is the part that's reflective. So the reflections are essentially like, say you have anger issues, as an example. Um, if you have anger, what's the word for it? What you put out into the world comes back to you. That's the reflective theory in a nutshell. But because of those fractals, if for example you're a very angry person, you will encounter a lot of things that will make you angry, and you will encounter more and more, or you encounter other people who are also angry or have issues with anger. That is the universe essentially reflecting back to you what you're putting out and what you want to see. So three or four people can look at one scenario or one situation and see different things. However, as long as their fractals are differently aligned. However, um, the idea is that the soul, as it connects out fractally. And by changing what's inside of oneself, in other words, how one interacts with those soul relationships, one can change the very nature of what's around them. So, if, for example, I need more testing on this. I will put that out first. I need more testing on this because this is a budding theory. However, the idea is if one were to theoretically, if one were to make their life better for themselves properly with proper soul and proper intent and do that properly in a divine way, make their life divine in a sense. Harkening back to the earlier definition of divine being a proper manifestation and alignment of soul. If one were to do things in their life divinely, the world would begin to do what it does divinely. However, you must also understand that the world already does everything it does divinely. Everything is doing, like, the interaction between a bird and a tree, that soul connection is already divine. Assume that all connections outside your own connections are already divine. Just focus on making your own fractal connections divine. And because what is actually happening is, for example, where you see someone whose connections aren't divine, what that actually is your own perception of that reflection back at you. And like as I said a while ago, it's entire. And the reason, the one thing I want to clarify about this theory is there's nothing you can do about it. It's more of like, if it exists, it's already happening. That's why I say consider all other interactions as already being divine. don't try and fix anything that is not within your own self and your own interactions with things, because you can't see their fractals, so you don't know whether or not their reflections are divine. However, you can slowly begin to ascertain whether your reflections are divine or not by how they interact with everything else, how they reflect throughout the. Think of it as a fractal of a bunch of mirrors. As I forgot who it was. I think it was Alan Watts who described it as your soul compared to the universe is like a dewdrop on a spider's web with a bunch of other dewdrops. When you look into one of those dewdrops, you can see every other dewdrop in the reflection of that dewdrop. And that changes how that dewdrop looks. But they're all reflecting one thing. And it's similar to that. And if you can change your perspective slightly and turn it, you may be able to see the you may be able to get glimpses of the proper reflection that you're trying to see. Like those games where they take an image and shatter it into pieces and you have to like spin the image around to line it up properly.
Mm-hmm.
It's exactly like that. You're looking at that shattered image, and that shattered image is you. However, if you line it up properly, it works. It suddenly is the image. And then it's no longer a shattered image, it's the image. And it's similar in that. So if you line up your own fractals properly, you'll see a different image of the world than you saw before. It's not that one image is there and the other isn't. They're both equally there. It's just you have to align yourself to see the one that you want. In the words, and I'll finish this off before I get feedback and questions. In the words of Nietzsche, there is no truth. There is only interpretations. Or as I like to put it, there's only matters of perspective. It's time for
Hmm.
questions. Yeah, I know that's a lot to take in.
Just like, ugh. Where do I
It's a
start?
working theory, which is the hardest part because I'm not
Where the
finished with it.
fuck do I start? Oh,
Start anywhere you want, man.
I, you know, I, hmm. The first part, the fractal part of this.
Let's start with that because it's two parts currently.
Yeah.
It's fractal and reflections. So let's start with the fractals and we'll clarify those. But remember that they are they are mutual. So I may have to explain things in the about the reflections to explain things about the fractals and vice versa. But we'll start with the
Fair.
fractals.
Basically, the common, not so much joke, but like the running gag slash series. Everything in the universe, to some extent, has some form of design.
You can say joke. That's fine. It's not. I always say my theories aren't meant to be taken seriously. They're meant to be taken sincerely. They're not grim things. They're fanciful ideas that if you like them, hold on to them and think about them for a while. But they're not meant to like. They're not meant to be something crazy.
Yeah, but like again, like the running joke is that, hey, everything in the universe has a grand design. Everything is made with some form of purpose.
I would say no to that. No, the
well,
purpose is no. There is no purpose to it.
that's not what I'm trying to get at. I'm
This
saying
theory
is
doesn't imply a purpose, but yes,
that's the running gag. So, to my
I guess,
understanding,
yeah.
everything in some sense, or
It has a form to it, is what you're trying to say.
Yeah, everything has
has
a form, and typically, most of the time, it's in the form of a fractal. You may not immediately think that way, but usually it does.
The part of the universe being fractally designed isn't my own concoctions of my brain. That's already backed by science. That's a thing that we've realized over the course of time, is that things, they may not be perfect fractals, but they do form fractally.
Yeah, they have some form of a pattern to them.
If you just look at a tree,
yeah,
and look at how it branches out and then branches out and then branches out fractally. If you look at a fractal tree and then a regular tree, you'll go, oh, yeah, those are fractals. Like some of these that are not like that are like CGI generated fractals look like regular trees. And some of these are just trees. But
But I mean,
that's the
like
thing.
continuation. In other words, like the mind is also a fractal. Every time from the moment we're born, it's forming this fractal. It's making new thoughts, new ideas, new perceptions,
Connections.
new
Connection.
connections. Yeah,
More
it's
soul.
yeah, making more soul. That's what I understand it as. Everything to some extent has a fractal aspect to it.
Yes. So far so good.
The other part is the reflections. Well, this one's that one's a little harder to kind of nail down.
The best way I can describe it is think of being in a room surrounded by mirrors. You're entirely surrounded by mirrors. Depending on what you like, if you move your body, the images in the mirror also change. And in the
Mm-hmm.
same way, the world is connected to your mind and body in a similar aspect to your thoughts and perceptions. And when you move those thoughts and perceptions and your perspective around, you will see different reflections in that mirror, in those mirrors that surround you. And that is reality, is those mirrors.
Gotcha.
The only thing you see is yourself. You can't see anything else because
Okay.
it's just a room of mirrors and you.
Also, I think there's a storm going on outside, and I think we may have got interrupted in our connection. So this is possibly going to be split into two parts if it like completely went down on YouTube.
Oh yeah,
But just to
nope, we're connected for now.
yeah,
Looks like
we
we're
have still have internet, but for now. So
yeah.
we're about to hit 9 o'clock. Do you want to like save it as another half just in case it goes down again, or do you think this last theory can be kind of chugged through?
Uh, we'll try chugging through it. If it goes down, it goes down.
Okay,
But right now we're just in the questions area, which I think should only take like 10 minutes or so,
gotcha.
10-15 minutes max. But if you got any more questions, go ahead and throw them at me because this is a bit of a, like a this is a teasing theory. Like you have to like sit there and chew on it for a while. But the more it's one of those things that the more you like think about it, the more it goes, yeah, that actually kind of makes sense. Because that's what it was for me. It took me years before I started this theory 4 or 5 years ago. I started thinking about like the very basic foundations of it. And as it's continued, it's become more and more of a like, yeah, that makes sense. And I've started to tease it into like a full theory.
Yeah. So like again with a reflection. So basically anything you can do or will do or decide to do does have a reflection. It's like, hey,
Yes.
an example, buddy of mine's seems like he's always pissed off all the time. He doesn't Nothing ever seems to really go his way. It's probably because he's getting back what he's putting out.
Yes. So, for example, even just think of it like impasse in the sense that if they're in a room with someone that is like pissed off, they will slowly start to become pissed off and reflect that energy back to the person. In the same way, um, that exists in like basically all your thoughts, actions, and perceptions have a ripple effect on reality. Whenever you decide like if even small acts like if you decide to say a mean comment to someone that ripples because that it may be small, it may be very small ripples, it may be like a drop of water in a pool, in an Olympic swimming pool, but like for example, if you kill someone, that's like throwing a rock in that pool. You made a big splash, and you'll feel the effects of that as the waves bounce against the walls, the mirrors of that pool, and ripple back to the center. And you'll feel those ripples come back. And in the same way, again, you may feel very small ripples, but if you keep dropping water into that pool, and you keep doing that, those ripples will get more and more intense as those waves converge and start to get stronger and stronger. And in the same way, even small acts of kindness and thoughtfulness will ripple throughout your life and will come back to you.
Hmm. So,
And
all right,
that's where the reflective comes in.
I guess, I know your, our understanding of karma and what most people consider karma are a little different. However,
And
I think
that was what I was going to get at.
it can still apply.
Yeah, the best way to describe the reflection is karma. However, not in the sense of my personal definition of karma is that it's not a legalistic thing. If you do bad things, you don't get punished for them. You get what you want, whether it's really what you want as a person or what you want in the sense of, like, you may have something that in the moment you think is bad, but when you look back on it, you think, wow, that was a really transformative learning experience that made me a better person. In a sense, you wanted that bad thing to happen to make you a better person. In a very it's a very far-fetched theory that we're not going to get into too much, but in a sense you do want it. And so your essentially your desires and your wants ripple into that pool. And if you strive for something, you will see those ripples of you striving, because it's like get sitting in a pool of water, and if you strive for something, it's like you're sloshing through it and moving, and those waves will come back into you. Some of them may push you forward and some of them may push you back. However, those waves are still coming back to you.
Yeah. But it is 9:04, and again, the storm. I'm gonna have to kind of put a CAG on this or put a pin in it somewhere, because
I'd love questions on this one. This is the one I want questions.
So
I want to hear questions from the audience or anyone listening.
More toward, again, this is more towards the audience and towards our YouTube in particular, my YouTube channel in particular. If you have any comments for Knox about the subject, please leave them. I will go through all of them and I will relay them to him. So if you have any questions, concerns, thoughts, comments, whatever, it could be like, oh, that's really cool, you should talk more about that. Please let us know. We will try to
be, you're an idiot, that doesn't make any sense, and then I'll try explaining it again.
Yeah, like anything.
No, if you think what I just said was crazy, pinpoint why you think it's crazy and inform me.
Yeah, like it could literally be anything. Give us some thoughts and process for him to kind of go through.
Yep. And I will come back to them when I can.
I appreciate your time, Knox.
We will see. Next week we may have a special cocktail specifically for me.
Yes. Maybe.
I think we will. Which we'll talk about that later. But
yes. But like I said, that's going to be it for today, more because of time and also because, like I said, there's a really bad storm outside and we could get cut off again. Luckily, YouTube didn't fully go down. It may have just stuttered, but on Twitch, it definitely went down, especially on OBS. So,
yeah,
we're going to go ahead and call it here. Thank you so much, Knox, for your time, and I will let you go, and I'll wrap this up.
All right, thank you.
And that's it, ladies and gentlemen. If you enjoyed today's episode of Cocktails and Curiosities, also now rebranded. We rebranded. I cannot talk. We rebranded it. It will now be known from now on as CNC. On the channel. So Cocktails and Curiosities. But if you enjoyed today's stream, let us know what you think. Like I said, if you have any thoughts on the theories that Knox over, please let us know. We will go through them as much as we can. As well as we have a Twitter that you can go to and come say hello. Both for my streams and for the podcast. It will mean a lot to me if you could give it a follow, give this channel a follow, give my YouTube a subscribe. That would be awesome. I know I'm shamelessly shilling out, but it helps. It shows your support and it lets us know you like what you see. But that's gonna be it for me. We will see you next week. Hopefully on time. Sunday at 8 p.m. Central Standard Time. I've been your host, Axel, and I will catch you guys tomorrow, actually, because I got to stream. I'll catch you guys later.